I think there's a dog dying in those woods." The words came out of Dennis Harper's mouth before he even knew what made him say them. He stood in the quiet glow of the late morning sun, mailbag slung across his shoulder, the low hum of cicadas thick in the air. His blue USPS polo clung to his back with sweat, and the buzz of summer in rural Kentucky wrapped around him like a blanket. But it wasn't the sun or the heat that made his heart kick hard against his ribs. It was the sound he thought he'd heard again, coming from the edge of that patch of trees near the vacant house on Maple Lane. He blinked against the glare. For a moment, nothing moved. Just a broken fence, overgrown grass, and an old tire swing that hadn't swung in years. But then, there it was again. A soft whimper, barely a breath of sound. But it was enough. Dennis had walked this route for 7 years. He'd seen every mailbox dented by teen mischief, waved at every front porch grandpa sipping iced tea, and knew which dogs barked and which just wagged their tails as he passed. But that house had been empty since the Thomas family moved away last winter, and Dennis had no reason to linger around it. Until now. The whimper came again, followed by a weak shuffle of dry leaves. Dennis hesitated. His hand hovered over the last envelope meant for the house across the street. But his mind was already across the road, behind the brambles. "All right," he murmured to himself, stuffing the envelope back in the bag. He crossed the street, boots crunching over gravel, sweat dripping from his temples. He moved past the mailbox with its paint peeling like sunburned skin and stepped cautiously into the overgrowth. Branches scratched at his arms as he pushed through. The air was thick, still. And then he saw it. Tied to a narrow tree with a ragged length of rope, a small brown puppy lay half-curled on its side. Its fur was matted with dirt and stuck in patches. Flies buzzed near its ears. A bowl, cracked and bone-dry, lay tipped on its side nearby. The pup didn't move when Dennis approached, just let out a low, hollow wheeze that might have once been a bark. Dennis knelt beside it, his knees sinking into the soft forest floor. He slowly reached out a hand. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "You still with me?" The puppy's eyes fluttered open, 2 dark, glassy pools full of confusion and pain. It tried to lift its head, but the movement cost too much. Dennis felt his throat tighten. He looked around, half expecting to find someone, some sign of who did this. But the woods were still. He fumbled for his phone with one hand, still murmuring softly to the puppy, fingers barely grazing its flank in the gentlest way he could manage. 911, what's your emergency? Yeah, I need animal control. There's a puppy tied to a tree on Maple Lane behind the old Thomas place. It's in bad shape. Real bad. Sir, are you with the animal now? Yes, I think he's starving. Maybe dehydrated. He's barely breathing. All right. Stay with the animal if it's safe. Help is on the way. Dennis ended the call and pulled off his cap, waving it gently over the dog to shoo the flies. He dared not untie it, unsure of its injuries. But he slid his water bottle from his mailbag and unscrewed the cap, tipping it slowly to moisten the edge of his handkerchief. Just a little, he whispered, dabbing the cool cloth against the dog's mouth. The pup stirred faintly, tongue twitching toward the moisture. Dennis's heart ached. Minutes passed, then the distant sound of tires crunching gravel. A county animal control van pulled up to the curb, and 2 uniformed officers stepped out. Dennis rose to meet them, explaining all he could. No tag, no collar. Looks like he's been here a while. One of the officers nodded grimly. We've seen this before. People move out, don't take the pets. Sometimes they just dump them. Dennis stared at him. How long could he survive out here like this? Depends, but not much longer, that's for sure. They worked fast. One officer brought over a small blanket and carefully untied the pup, while the other fetched water and a crate. The dog whimpered again, too weak to resist. As they carried him away, Dennis found himself walking alongside them to the van. Where will he go? County shelter. We'll get a vet to look at him. If he pulls through, he might be up for adoption. Dennis nodded, eyes still locked on the bundle of fur now resting in the crate. The door closed with a soft click. That night, Dennis sat on his porch, hands wrapped around a lukewarm coffee he hadn't touched. His wife, Carol, sat across from him, eyes scanning his face. You all right? I can't stop thinking about him. The puppy. He was just lying there like he'd already given up. Carol reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. You saved him. That matters. Dennis didn't answer right away. The crickets were out now, and the cicadas had quieted. A soft wind stirred the porch flags. Finally, he said, I wonder if he had a name, if someone called him something once. Carol gave a sad smile. Maybe he needs a new one, a fresh start. He nodded slowly, staring into the dark. The next morning, Dennis swung by the county shelter before starting his route. The woman at the front desk recognized him and led him back through the building. We cleaned him up, gave him fluids. He's still weak, but hanging on. The room smelled like disinfectant and sawdust. In a small crate by the far wall, the puppy lay curled on a soft towel. His fur had been cleaned, revealing a light golden brown coat. His eyes fluttered open as Dennis stepped closer. Hey again, buddy, Dennis murmured. The dog's tail gave a faint twitch. That was all. We don't have a name on record, the staffer said behind him. Dennis looked down at the pup. How about Scout? She smiled. Scout it is. Over the next few days, Dennis visited every morning. He brought small toys, treats the vet approved, and sat with Scout before his shift. The pup began to respond more each day, first with tail wags, then with the strength to lift his head. After a week, he barked, a rusty, hoarse sound that still made Dennis smile so wide his face hurt. Scout's ribs weren't so visible anymore. He could stand now, wobbly but upright, and his eyes followed Dennis wherever he went. The shelter manager caught him at the desk one morning. We're looking for fosters, she said. You seem pretty attached. Dennis hesitated. Carol was allergic. They'd never had pets in the house. But something about Scout wouldn't let him topas know. I'll talk to my wife, he said. That evening, over dinner, Dennis told Carol everything. She listened quietly, chewing slowly, nodding once in a while. He's got nowhere else to go right now, Dennis said. And I don't know. I feel like I was supposed to find him. Carol set down her fork. I can take allergy meds. Dennis looked up, surprised. She shrugged. You care about him. I can see it. That little guy needs a chance. 2 days later, Scout came home. He had his own little bed in the laundry room, a bowl with his name painted on it, and a stuffed duck he carried everywhere. At first, he didn't leave Dennis's side. Followed him from room to room, tail wagging just a little faster each day. He was still skittish around loud noises. The creak of a screen door or a dropped spoon would send him diving for cover, but he always came back out, peeking around corners until he saw Dennis. Weeks passed. Scout grew stronger. He started exploring the yard, barking at squirrels rolling in the grass. Neighbors would wave from their porches as Dennis walked him in the evenings, the leash slack, Scout trotting happily beside him. "That your dog?" Mrs. Bixby from next door asked one evening. Dennis looked down at Scout. The pup looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. "Yeah," Dennis said. "He's mine." Scout settled into life as if he'd always belonged. He rode shotgun in the mail van some mornings, snoozing with his head on Dennis's lap. He watched football with Carol on Sundays, head tilted whenever the whistle blew. And every night, before bed, he curled up at the foot of their bed, letting out a soft sigh that said everything Dennis had hoped to hear. But there was something else, too. A question that wouldn't leave Dennis alone. Who had tied Scout to that tree? Who had left him there to fade into the dirt, waiting for a mercy that might never have come? The thought stayed with him, nagging, itching like a splinter beneath the skin. Because dogs like Scout didn't end up alone by accident. Someone had made that choice. Someone who might have done it before, or might do it again. Dennis started noticing things, small things. At first, it was just a passing curiosity. He told himself that. A coincidence here, a detail there. He didn't want to believe it was anything more. Scout was growing fast, filling out, his coat shining now like honey in the sun. He was a different dog entirely from the one Dennis had found trembling in the dirt. Full of energy, hopeful. But sometimes he still whimpered in his sleep. Sometimes he growled at shadows near the porch, ears flat, tail stiff. Dennis would crouch next to him and murmur soothing words until the tension faded. One morning, as Dennis dropped a package on the front step of the old Henson house, he glanced toward the woods again. That same patch of trees. The rope had been removed, probably by animal control. But the image remained burned into his memory. Scout, barely breathing, surrounded by silence. Back in his truck, Dennis reviewed the list of empty houses on his route. A few properties had been abandoned after the job cuts the previous winter. People couldn't keep up with payments, just left in the night. He remembered a white pickup that used to be parked outside the Thomas house. Beat-up bumper, rust near the wheel well. A few times he'd seen a teenage boy sitting on the porch swing with a cigarette hanging from his lip, barely nodding at Dennis as he passed. He tapped the steering wheel, lost in thought. That afternoon, Dennis made a detour on his way home. He pulled into the county records office, the brick building just down from the library. The woman at the front desk wore thick glasses and a kind smile. "I'm trying to figure out who owned the property at 184 Maple Lane," Dennis said. "Vacant now. I'm just curious." She nodded and typed on her keyboard. Last registered to the Thomas family. They officially foreclosed in December. Bank took possession in January. "Any renters before that?" "Not on record, no, but sometimes people let friends stay over. We wouldn't have that unless it was filed." Dennis thanked her and left, unease tugging at his stomach. He didn't know what he was looking for. Not really. But something didn't sit right. The next few days went by with the usual rhythm. Mailbags, front doors, friendly waves, barking dogs. But something shifted when Dennis noticed Scout reacting oddly to one specific house on his walking route. It was a small, single-story home, white siding, porch chipping paint. A rusted lawnmower sat near the hedges. Every time they passed, Scout would freeze, tail low, head down. Not fearful exactly, more like bracing. "You okay, boy?" Dennis asked the second time it happened, kneeling beside him. Scout whined, barely audible. Dennis looked up. The The curtains twitched. A man stepped onto the porch a moment later. White, early 30s, pale skin, skinny arms covered in fading tattoos. He lit a cigarette and stared, not speaking. Dennis offered a quick nod and moved on. That night, Dennis mentioned it to Carol. There's something about that place. Scout acts like he remembers it. I mean, dogs don't lie. Carol sipped her tea. Do you think it could be the guy who left him tied up? I don't know. I don't want to jump to conclusions. But Scout reacts the same way every time. Like clockwork. Carol sat quiet for a moment. Maybe you should talk to someone. Maybe the shelter? See if they've had dogs come in from that street before. Dennis nodded slowly. Yeah, I might. He visited the shelter the next morning, after his shift. The front desk staff had changed, but the assistant director, a woman named Rachel, remembered Scout. You think someone hurt him? She asked, her expression tightening. I don't know, but he acts strange near this one house. It's happened 3 times now. And that guy, he doesn't say anything, just watches. Rachel pulled up a list of intakes from the past 6 months. We did have another dog brought in from that area last fall. Not tied up, but malnourished. Skittish. Could be coincidence. Dennis leaned on the counter. I don't know, it just doesn't feel like one. Rachel gave a thoughtful nod. Well, if it happens again, maybe talk to animal control. They know the patterns better than we do. Dennis thanked her and left. He didn't stop walking Scout past that house. He didn't want to change the routine, didn't want to reward the fear. But he began watching closely. Not just Scout, but the man on the porch. One morning, the man called out as they passed. Cute mutt. Dennis turned, instincts sharp. Thanks. The man blew smoke from his nose. Strays always find somebody soft. Yeah, guess I'm soft. The man snorted, flicking his cigarette. Watch out, though. Sometimes they bite. Dennis felt his pulse in his ears. He forced a tight smile. Only if they're treated bad. He walked on. 2 days later, something changed. Scout refused to walk past the house. He pulled hard in the opposite direction, tail tucked, ears down. Dennis had to kneel beside him for 5 full minutes before the pup even looked up. Okay, he whispered. We'll go around today. Just today. That evening, Dennis drove to the shelter again. Rachel wasn't in, but one of the volunteers, a quiet older man named Hugh, offered to talk. I saw that dog when he came in, Hugh said. Skin and bones, the kind of look you don't forget. You remember anything about the call, the tip? Hugh nodded. Wasn't a call. Mailman found him. You. Dennis blinked. No, the other one, the one in the fall. Oh, right. Yeah. That was someone else. Think it came in anonymously. Could be the same guy. Could be a neighbor. Sometimes folks don't want to get involved directly. Dennis thought for a long time that night. Sitting on the back steps, Scout curled at his feet. He stared out across the yard and wondered if the man in that house had tied Scout up. If maybe Scout had been one of several dogs. If this was a pattern, not an accident. He called animal control the next morning. I don't want to accuse anyone, Dennis said over the phone. But I found a dog tied to a tree a few weeks back, and now the same dog reacts really badly to this one house. And someone else brought in another malnourished dog from the same area last fall. The voice on the other end was calm but alert. What's the address? Dennis gave it. You said the dog reacts every time. Every time. All right, we can look into it. Might just drive by, knock on the door. Nothing too formal unless we see something. That's all I ask." The following week, a quiet tension settled over Dennis's route. Scout continued improving, bounding after tennis balls in the backyard, licking Carol's hand during evening TV. But every walk felt like a wire pulled tight. Dennis avoided that street for a few days, just to give it space. Then, on a Friday, he passed the house again. This time, the man wasn't on the porch. The lawn looked even more overgrown, and a window was cracked open on the side. Scout stayed close to Dennis's leg, but didn't pull away. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was all coincidence. That was the hope Dennis clung to. Until Sunday morning. Dennis was out back when he heard Scout bark, sharper than usual, quick and alarmed. He turned to see the pup at the edge of the yard, ears up, tail stiff, staring through the fence slats. Then Dennis heard the sound. A whine, faint but familiar. He hurried to the fence, cupped his hands around his ears, and listened. Another whimper. Very close. Coming from just beyond the back lot line. Dennis opened the gate and walked into the woods behind his house. A narrow creek ran through there, bordered by ivy and ferns. It was quiet, except for that sound. The whimper came again. He followed it. 30 feet in, beneath a bush, he found her. Another dog, this one older, thin, gray-muzzled, a scar across one shoulder. No rope this time, no collar either. She looked up at him, frightened. "Hey there," Dennis said softly, heart sinking. He didn't know how she got there, but he had a feeling. That night, the shelter took her in. They scanned for a chip. Nothing. Malnourished, but no major injuries. Still, it was the second dog found alone within weeks, and this one much too close to home. Dennis didn't sleep much. Neither did Scout, who paced the hallway, sniffing the front door like he expected someone out there. The next morning, Dennis called animal control again. "You need to do more than a drive-by," he said. "Something's going on." They promised to escalate. On Wednesday, Dennis saw them. 2 officers, plain clothes, parked down the street, watching. They didn't knock, not yet, just observed. Scout watched too, sitting beside Dennis on the porch, tail wagging slow and uncertain. Carol brought them lemonade. "You think they'll find something?" she asked. Dennis didn't answer right away. "I think someone knows what they did, and I think they're waiting to see if anyone else knows too." Scout laid his head on Dennis's shoe. Somewhere out there, someone had once looked at this dog and decided he didn't matter, but Dennis knew better, and he wasn't about to forget it. The watchers stayed for days, quiet, patient. Dennis kept delivering mail, and Scout kept healing, one walk, one bark, one nuzzle at a time. The knock came early on a Thursday morning. Dennis had just set his coffee down, steam still curling from the surface. Carol was flipping through the local paper. Scout sprawled out on the rug, with his head tucked beneath a paw. It was barely past 7. Dennis opened the door to find a woman standing on the porch, dressed in a navy windbreaker, with a small gold badge pinned to her chest. She looked to be in her mid-40s, blonde hair pulled into a low ponytail, her expression firm but not unfriendly. "Mr. Harper?" "Yes." She extended a hand. "Detective Lynn Carrigan. I'm following up on your calls to animal control. You mind if I ask a few questions?" Dennis stepped aside and motioned her in. "Of course, come on in." Carol rose, giving the detective a polite nod before heading to the kitchen, murmuring something about making a fresh pot. Scout sat up, alert, but didn't bark. His eyes tracked the newcomer with curiosity, then caution. "Is this the dog you found?" Kerrigan asked, crouching slightly. Dennis nodded. "That's Scout. I found him tied to a tree 3 weeks ago, just off Maple Lane." Kerrigan took out a notepad. "And you believe someone at the house near the Thomas property is responsible?" "I can't say for sure," Dennis replied. "But Scout reacts every time we pass that house. And we found another dog behind my place just a few days ago. Same condition. No collar, underfed." Kerrigan made a note. "Animal control has had a few eyes on the property. Nothing definite yet. But you've got good instincts." Dennis glanced at Scout. "I just pay attention." "You ever spoken directly with the man who lives there?" "Once or twice. He doesn't say much. Last week he made a comment about stray dogs. Kind of odd." "You get his name?" "No. Mail doesn't go to him. It's addressed to a woman. Something Bartlett. Haven't seen her in a while, though." Kerrigan scribbled again. "All right. We'll keep watching. Just keep doing what you're doing. If you see anything else, call me directly." She handed over a card and gave Scout one last glance. "He's lucky you found him." Dennis nodded. "I'm the lucky one." After she left, Carol poured 2 mugs and slid one across the table. She seemed serious. "Yeah, more serious than the others. Maybe something will actually come of this." Scout wandered over and nuzzled Dennis's knee. The morning sun was starting to brighten the kitchen walls. Dennis went about his route that day with one eye always scanning. The White House was quiet. No movement. The mailbox hadn't been emptied in over a week. He considered walking Scout by again, but decided against it. For now. That weekend brought storms, heavy wind, sheets of rain that turned the neighborhood into a wet blur. Scout didn't like the thunder, hiding beneath the couch until it passed. Dennis stayed inside, using the time to organize old photographs and clean out the shed. Sunday morning dawned clearer, but the air was thick with moisture. Dennis stood on the porch with Scout as the clouds slowly broke apart, revealing bits of blue. "You ready for a walk, boy?" Scout wagged his tail. They didn't take their usual route. Instead, Dennis chose a loop through the park and down Pine Street, letting Scout sniff along the fence lines and trees. By the time they got home, the pup was muddy and grinning, tongue flopping out the side of his mouth. Carol had just finished mopping the kitchen when they returned. "That better not be mud, I hear," she called out as they stepped inside. "Just Joy with 4 legs," Dennis replied. She laughed and shook her head, already reaching for the towel. That afternoon, they received a call. It was Rachel from the shelter. "Dennis, we had a woman come in just now, middle-aged. Said she found a dog in the woods, real thin. Wouldn't say where exactly, but I think it was near that house you mentioned." Dennis's grip tightened on the phone. "How bad?" "Could be worse, but it fits the pattern." "Do you think she was involved?" "Hard to say. She was nervous. Wouldn't give her name. Dropped the dog and left." Dennis thanked her and hung up. He stared out the window for a long time. The next day, he called Kerrigan. "That's the 3rd dog in a month," he said. "All within a few blocks of that house. Something's going on." Kerrigan agreed. "We're going to file for a warrant. Might take a few days. And if they move before then we hope they make a mistake." Dennis hung up, stomach tight. That evening, he took Scout out again. They stayed on their side of the neighborhood, avoiding the house entirely. Still, Dennis felt the eyes. Somewhere behind a curtain, someone was watching. Scout kept glancing over his shoulder, ears perked, body tense. Back home, Dennis checked the locks twice. 2 days passed, then 3. Finally, on a Thursday morning, Kerrigan called again. "We got the warrant. We're going in this afternoon. You won't be needed, but I wanted to let you know." Dennis sat down slowly. "Thanks for telling me." "And thank you," Kerrigan added. "We might not have gotten here without your reports." Dennis hung up and looked over at Scout, who sat on the rug chewing his duck toy. Later that afternoon, Dennis stood at his kitchen window. Across the street, he saw the unmarked car pull up, then another. Officers stepped out, one with a clipboard, another holding a camera. They walked up to the house, knocked, waited. No answer. Then they stepped inside. He didn't see much more. The trees blocked most of the view. But an hour later, a van arrived. Animal control. 2 crates were carried out. Dogs inside. Thin, quiet. One barked once, then fell silent. Dennis swallowed. He kept watching as 2 people emerged from the house, escorted by officers. A man and a woman. Both white, both thin, both with worn clothes and downturned faces. The man looked like the one from the porch. Scout was watching too, ears high, body still. "They got them," Dennis said softly. Carol joined him at the window. "You think that's it?" "I hope so." That evening, Scout seemed lighter. His steps had more bounce. He played longer in the yard, chasing a squeaky ball until the sun dipped low. Dennis sat on the porch, beer in hand, watching the pup weave between the flower beds. The neighborhood felt quieter, not just from the absence of barking, but from something else, like a shadow had finally lifted. Still, Dennis knew there might be more. Dogs that never got found, people who never spoke up. But for now, they'd stopped one link in the chain, and that mattered. That weekend, the local paper ran a small piece about the bust. Animal cruelty charges, neglect, no names, but enough detail to make it clear. Dennis clipped the article and tucked it into a drawer. He didn't tell Scout. But something in the dog seemed to know. In the mornings, Scout stopped pausing at the corner. No more whimpering. No more backward glances. Just the eager trot of a dog finally learning what it felt like to be safe. Dennis kept walking him, rain or shine. They explored new trails, met other dogs. People smiled, waved, asked questions. "Where'd you find him? What's his name? He seems so happy." Dennis always answered the same way. "Found him on my route, tied to a tree. He found me, really. His name's Scout." He never went into the rest. Not unless someone really wanted to know. Because Scout's story wasn't just about pain. It was about healing. About the way one little creature, half dead in the dirt, could come back to life with some food, some care, and a whole lot of love. Dennis still got up early every day. Still wore the same uniform, slung the same bag over his shoulder. But the world felt different now, like it had room for something better. And Scout? He just kept walking, kept wagging, kept chasing birds he never caught, and curling up on the porch in the golden evening light. Dennis watched him with quiet gratitude, thinking not for the first time how strange and lucky life could be. That a simple morning sound, a whimper in the woods, could change everything. But something else lingered too, because the world didn't fix itself overnight. And Dennis had a feeling this wasn't the end of what Scout had to teach him. not by a long shot. A month after the arrest, things started to shift in the neighborhood. Not in big ways, but in the kind of small, quiet adjustments that only someone like Dennis would notice. The old house on the corner where the arrests had been made sat empty now, its blinds drawn, mailbox taped shut by the county. No cars in the driveway, no lights at night. The silence around it wasn't the same as before. It was heavier now, still. People walked past it a little faster. The neighbors whispered more freely, behind trimmed hedges and half-closed windows. And while most folks didn't say anything directly to Dennis, there was a new softness in their eyes when they waved to him on his route. A kind of understanding. Scout continued to thrive. His energy stretched into every corner of the house. He no longer tiptoed around thresholds or flinched at sudden noises. He had grown into his name, nose constantly sniffing, ears alert, tail high. Dennis had to laugh sometimes at how confidently the little dog now strutted through the yard like he owned the land. But it wasn't just Scout who was changing. Dennis found himself looking at the world a little differently. When he walked his route now, he noticed the dogs more. Not just the ones who barked behind fences or wagged from porches. He watched for the ones that seemed hesitant, the ones that stayed back in shadows, the ones that didn't seem to belong. He started keeping dog biscuits in his mailbag. One morning, while delivering packages on Willow Street, Dennis heard a soft scuffle behind a trash bin. He paused, crouched slowly, and peered behind it. A lean, brindle-colored mutt stared back at him with wide, wary eyes. "Hey there," Dennis said gently, reaching into his pocket. "I've got something for you." He held out a biscuit, palm open. The dog didn't move. Dennis waited. After nearly a full minute, the dog crept forward on trembling paws and took the treat. Then it bolted. Dennis didn't chase. He just stood, thoughtful, and looked around. No collar, no leash, no sign of an owner. He marked the spot on his mental map and returned the next day. This time, the dog was waiting. He repeated the routine every morning for 5 days. The dog never let him get closer than a few feet, but it always showed up. And then, on the 6th day, it didn't. Dennis looked longer than he should have, even checked behind the houses nearby, but the dog was gone. That night, he sat on the porch with Scout curled against his leg. "I wonder what happened to her," Dennis said aloud. "Hope she found her way home." Scout licked his fingers and blinked up at him, as if trying to understand. Later that week, a letter arrived addressed to Dennis Harper, mail carrier extraordinaire. There was no return address. The handwriting was loose and spidery. Dennis opened it at the kitchen table while Carol dried dishes. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper with shaky words. "Saw what you did for the dogs. Thank you. Not all of us can speak up, but we notice." Dennis read the note twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into a drawer beside the newspaper clipping from the arrest. He didn't mention it to Carol right away. Something about the note felt private, like a quiet handshake from someone behind the curtain. In the following days, Dennis started seeing new faces at the shelter. Families looking to adopt, teenagers volunteering, local folks donating food and blankets. Rachel at the shelter told him they were receiving more calls now, more reports of strays and concerns. "Whatever stirred up last month," she said, "it hasn't settled, but in a good way. People care more now. It's like they just needed a reason." Dennis wasn't sure if he was the reason. Maybe it was Scout. Maybe it was just the right moment. The city scheduled a public hearing to address animal neglect cases. Carol nudged Dennis to go, but he hesitated. "I'm just a mailman," he told her. "You're more than that to them," she replied, nodding toward Scout, who was snoozing by the radiator. Dennis ended up attending. He didn't speak. He just sat in the back and listened as people stood to share stories, to ask for stricter penalties, more funding for rescues, better community education. He recognized a few faces. The woman from the shelter, a young man from the neighborhood who had adopted a three-legged dog. Even Detective Kerrigan was there, speaking calmly about the importance of follow-up investigations and interagency cooperation. After the meeting, Kerrigan spotted him near the exit. "Didn't think I'd see you here," she said. Dennis shrugged. "Thought I'd listen." She smiled. "Well, your listening did more good than you know." He nodded, then turned to leave. Scout was waiting in the car. That weekend, Dennis built a small wooden bench beneath the oak tree in the backyard. It was Scout's favorite spot to lie in the afternoon sun. Carol brought out lemonade and 2 folding chairs. "We should name it," she said. "The Little Patch." "Scout's Corner," Dennis suggested. "Perfect." Later, as the sun dipped low, Dennis watched as Scout bounded toward the tree, toy duck clutched in his mouth. He dropped it at the base, circled twice, and flopped down with a heavy sigh of contentment. It was in that quiet moment that Dennis felt the full weight of everything that had happened. The tree, the rope, the whimper in the woods, the fear, the recovery, the hope. It didn't fade. It settled into his bones, into the earth beneath the bench, into the morning breeze that rustled the grass. Dennis began writing small notes on his route. Not long letters, just brief messages. Encouragement slipped into mailboxes with friendly dogs. "Give Rusty an extra treat today. Your dog has a great bark. Scout says hi to Bella." Some people responded with smiles and returned notes. Some left drawings of their pets. A child on Elm Street drew a picture of Dennis in his uniform holding Scout's leash. It hung on the refrigerator from that day forward. One rainy morning, as Dennis stood under a porch awning waiting for the downpour to ease, a man stepped outside holding a cup of coffee. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet look about him. He nodded at Dennis, then glanced down the street. "You the one who found the dog?" "Which one?" Dennis asked. The man gave a slight smile. "The little golden one. The one who walks beside you." Dennis nodded. "That was me. Good dog. Saw you at the park. He stays close." "Yeah, he's come a long way." The man looked at his feet. "My sister left her dog behind. Didn't know what to do, wasn't mine to take, but I should have done something." Dennis didn't respond right away. He let the rain speak. Finally, he said, "Doing something now matters too." The man looked up and nodded. The rain eased. Dennis finished his route and went home. Scout met him at the door like always, tail sweeping the floor in wide arcs. That night, Carol made stew. Dennis ate slowly, savoring the warmth, the peace. But even in that comfort, the thought remained. There were still more dogs out there, still more people who needed help knowing how to care, how to act. And Dennis knew he couldn't fix everything, but he could do something. A walk at a time, a letter at a time, a biscuit in his pocket. Scout nudged his leg beneath the table, as if agreeing. Dennis reached down and gave his head a scratch. He wasn't just delivering mail anymore. He was delivering a message. That kindness was never wasted, and someone was always listening, even when they couldn't speak, even when they waited in the woods, hoping for a miracle. Dennis had always considered himself a man of routine. Wake up, coffee, route, lunch, finish deliveries, return home. The rhythm kept his thoughts quiet, his world manageable. But after Scout came into his life, and especially after the arrests, that routine began to change in subtle, unexpected ways. Every morning now started with a walk through the neighborhood with Scout. The pup had grown taller, leaner, his stride longer and more confident. He seemed to know the streets as well as Dennis did, pausing outside certain yards to wag at other dogs, stopping in front of the bakery where the owner sometimes left out crusts for birds and now the occasional biscuit for him. Dennis began noticing how much more open people were, too. Neighbors who used to keep to themselves now greeted him with warmth. Some asked about Scout directly. Others shared stories about their own dogs, the old, the lost, the new. Dennis listened. He always had time for a good dog story. One morning, a boy on a red scooter raced up beside Dennis as he approached the Myers house. "You the guy with Scout?" Dennis looked down at Scout, who stood proudly beside him, tail swinging. "That's us," Dennis said. The boy grinned. "We saw you on TV. My mom showed me. You helped rescue a bunch of dogs, right?" Dennis chuckled. "Well, I helped a little. Scout did the rest." "He's a hero," the boy declared. Scout barked once as if in agreement. From that moment, Dennis noticed Scout was something of a celebrity. It started small, a kid pointing from across the street, a woman snapping a photo from her porch. Then came the invitations. The local school wanted Dennis to speak to the third graders about animal kindness. The library asked if Scout could attend a community reading event. The shelter asked if he'd consider appearing in an adoption ad campaign. Dennis was hesitant at first. He didn't think of himself as a public speaker, let alone the face of anything. But Carol nudged him gently, reminding him that people listened when the message came from someone they trusted. "Besides," she said, running a hand over Scout's head, "he cleans up well." The school visit was the first event. Dennis arrived in his uniform, Scout on a bright blue leash. The kids gasped when they entered the classroom. "Is that him? Can I pet him? He looks like a movie dog." Dennis told the story as simply as he could, about hearing a sound in the woods, following it, finding Scout tied to a tree. He didn't focus on the sadness. He talked about recovery, about small kindnesses, about paying attention. The kids listened with wide eyes. One girl raised her hand and asked, "How did you know to help him? What if it was scary?" Dennis thought for a moment. "I didn't know. I just hoped I could. Sometimes helping means stepping towards something even if you're not sure." The room was silent after that. Scout wagged his tail and gently licked the hand of the girl closest to him. Later, the principal gave Dennis a framed drawing the children had made together. It showed Scout under a big tree, with Dennis beside him holding a mailbag full of hearts. He hung it in his office at home. After that, the requests kept coming. The local animal shelter ran a weekend event called Scout's Day Out, encouraging families to come meet adoptable pets. They made signs with Scout's photo, his rescue story printed underneath. Dennis showed up to support, standing under a tent with Carol and Scout by his side. The turnout was larger than expected. More than 20 dogs were adopted that day. One older man approached Dennis with tears in his eyes. He said he'd been alone since his wife passed, hadn't thought he could care for another living thing. But after seeing Scout's story, He adopted a quiet hound named Macy. Figured if that pup can come back from that, I can try again too, the man said. Dennis shook his hand. You'll be good for each other. Scout sat obediently beside them, tail flicking. Over time, Dennis and Scout became a familiar sight, not just on their mail route, but across town. They were invited to a local radio show. The mayor sent a letter thanking Dennis for his unwavering service to both community and compassion. Dennis didn't read the letter out loud. The word choice felt a little too formal, but he tucked it beside the drawing from the kids. One Friday evening, Dennis came home to find a small group of neighbors waiting outside with Scout-themed cupcakes and handmade signs. Scout for mayor! Every dog deserves a Dennis. Carol laughed as Dennis stood dumbfounded in the driveway. Scout ran up to each person, sniffing and wagging, soaking up attention. The moment was joyful, but something inside Dennis felt a little fragile. When the crowd dispersed and the yard returned to quiet, he sat on the back steps while Scout sniffed around the garden. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he said softly to Carol, who joined him with a blanket. You didn't plan it, she agreed. But you answered it. That's the part people see. Dennis nodded, uncertain. That night, he had a dream. He was back in the woods, only this time the trees were thicker, the air colder. He could hear whimpering, but every time he turned, the sound shifted. Scout wasn't there. Dennis kept calling, voice raw. Then he woke up, hand clenched in the blanket. Scout was asleep at his feet. The next morning, Dennis called Rachel at the shelter. You said before there might be more. More dogs not reported. More that slipped through. I did, she said. Why? Because I want to help more directly, not just as a mailman with a soft heart. Something official. Rachel was quiet for a moment. We could always use volunteers, but if you're thinking more, we've got an outreach coordinator role we never filled. It's part-time, public-facing, talks to neighborhoods, tracks patterns, wouldn't interfere with your route. Dennis thought. Can I try it? See how it feels? Absolutely. We'd be lucky to have you. That weekend, Dennis attended his first shelter meeting in an official capacity. He sat in a folding chair with a notepad, Scout lying dutifully at his feet. He listened to staff discuss at-risk areas, low-reporting neighborhoods, barriers that kept people from reporting abuse. When it was his turn to speak, Dennis cleared his throat. Sometimes people don't report things because they're scared of what they'll have to admit. Maybe they ignored it too long. Maybe they saw something and did nothing. We need to give them a way to act without shame. We need to make it easy to speak up. The room nodded. Scout barked once, softly, and everyone smiled. That night, Carol made dinner extra special. Roast chicken, garlic potatoes, a peach cobbler that filled the whole house with sweetness. Feels like we're on a new path, she said. Dennis raised a glass of lemonade. Not just us. Scout sat beside the table, watching with eyes that had seen both abandonment and love, and knew the value of both. As the weeks went on, Dennis found himself balancing two lives, the steady rhythm of mail delivery and the growing responsibility at the shelter. He started writing pamphlets, organizing neighborhood events, even helping install a fenced dog run in the empty lot behind the community center. Everywhere they went, people recognized Scout. Kids would run up with drawings, adults would ask for advice. Dennis stayed humble, but he never turned anyone away. One morning, while sorting mail at the depot, he overheard two new hires talking about a dog they'd seen on the edge of the highway. thin, darting through weeds. Dennis paused. Where? They gave him the cross streets. After his shift, he and Scout drove out there. It took nearly an hour, but they found her. A small terrier mix hiding under an abandoned billboard. It took time. Scout helped. He sat quietly a few feet away while Dennis coaxed the dog out with a strip of jerky. She was trembling, but not aggressive, just scared. They brought her to the shelter. She was chipped. Her name was Daisy. She'd been missing for 2 months. Her family was called. The reunion was tearful. That night, Dennis didn't sleep much. He sat on the porch with Scout, watching the stars. That makes 4 now, he whispered. 4 who got a second chance. Scout shifted closer, resting his head on Dennis's foot. The breeze was warm. The night was quiet. And somewhere, another dog waited to be found. Dennis wasn't a hero. He didn't need to be. He was just a man with good ears, a good dog, and the belief that no voice should be ignored, no matter how soft it might be. Dennis could hardly remember the last time his life had felt this full. Not busy. He'd been busy before, when mail routes doubled during the holidays, and he'd found himself skipping lunch just to keep up. But this was different. This fullness wasn't about tasks. It was about meaning, purpose, something he hadn't known he'd been missing until a frightened little puppy changed everything. Scout's presence had woven itself into every corner of his day. When Dennis woke up, Scout was there, tail wagging lazily at the edge of the bed, stretching with a groan as if he, too, had slept through something important. When Dennis returned from work, Scout met him at the door, duck toy in his mouth, eyes bright. Their bond had deepened into a rhythm of unspoken understanding. Even Carol, who once sneezed at the idea of living with a dog, now left space for Scout on the couch and occasionally let him lick the spoon after stirring her morning oatmeal. But with the growing recognition came new responsibilities. Dennis had been helping more at the shelter, reviewing reports of animal sightings, working on educational pamphlets, and coordinating small events. One Tuesday evening, he found himself in the basement of a local church setting up folding chairs for a new initiative called Neighbors for Paws, a community group meant to bring awareness to animal neglect and encourage positive action. Rachel arrived with flyers under one arm and a box of donuts in the other. "We should have done this years ago," she said as she helped him lay out materials. "You might not believe it, but people pay more attention when someone like you talks. You don't sound like an expert. You sound like someone who noticed." Dennis offered a small smile. "I only ever noticed because Scout gave me a reason." That night, nearly 30 people showed up. Some were older women who brought photos of their dogs. Some were teenagers from the high school animal club. One man, with sun-darkened skin and deep lines around his eyes, stood up quietly and said, "I saw a dog out near the railroad tracks. Not mine. Looked lost. Didn't know who to call." Rachel took down the details. The next day, she and Dennis went out with Scout riding in the back seat of the shelter van. They drove to the edge of town where the tracks ran past abandoned sheds and tall weeds. Dennis stepped out and cupped his hands. "Here, pup. Come on now." Scout barked once and perked up. He jumped from the van and started sniffing. 10 minutes later, they found her, a pale tan dog with one ear bent permanently sideways. Thin, but not skittish, she watched them from behind a stack of rotting crates. Scout sat calmly a few feet away, tail wagging gently. The tan dog crept forward. Rachel held out a treat, slow and steady. "You always expect it to take longer," she said. but sometimes they choose you. They brought her back, named her Junebug. Within a week, a retired couple adopted her. Dennis returned to his mail route with a new sense of watchfulness. He didn't just scan for addresses now. He scanned for signs, a broken fence, an overturned bowl, a dog barking too long without response. One morning on Elmwood, he saw a dog chained to a porch without shade in 90-degree heat. He knocked, waited. Nobody answered. He called animal control. They handled it. The following week, he passed by the same house. The dog was gone. A flyer taped to the mailbox read, "Rescued, thank you." It wasn't always that simple. Some calls led nowhere. Sometimes the dog was just visiting. Sometimes the people were home, just unaware. But Dennis made the calls anyway, quietly, without judgment. One evening, Carol came home with an envelope from the community center. Inside was a thank you letter signed by nearly 100 people, all of them touched by the events Scout had sparked. Dennis read it once, then again. "You ever think you'd be doing any of this?" Carol asked. He folded the letter. "Not in a million years." She placed a hand on his. "And yet you are." Scout was invited to a regional shelter summit 2 towns over. Dennis drove him out on a Saturday, unsure what to expect. The event was bigger than he thought. Tents, banners, local vendors, speeches. They set up a table with photos of Scout's journey, copies of the community pamphlets, and a small guest book. People came up all day. Some asked questions. Some shared their own rescue stories. One woman cried as she described the moment she found her dog limping along a county road, unsure whether to stop. She had. And now, 5 years later, she said, she couldn't imagine life without him. Dennis found himself talking more than he ever had in public. Not speeches, just conversations. Honest ones. A young man in a faded ball cap lingered by the edge of the booth. "You the guy with the mail route?" Dennis nodded. "That's me." The man hesitated. "I used to live on Maple Lane. I knew that house, the one with the dogs. Never said anything. Never thought it was my place." Dennis looked at him carefully. "You're saying something now. That counts." The man lowered his eyes. "Wish I'd done it sooner." "Most of us do," Dennis said. "But today matters too." Scout sat quietly through it all, head high, occasionally dozing in the shade behind the booth. Children pet him, strangers gave him treats, and a photographer from the local paper snapped their picture. That photo would appear on the front page the following Monday. The headline read, "Hope on 4 legs." Dennis wasn't one for attention, but he kept a copy. Later that week, Rachel called him. "We got asked to help advise a new county ordinance. Stronger animal welfare measures. They want you in the room." "I'm not a lawyer," Dennis said. "No," she agreed. "But you're the reason the conversation's even happening. They want someone real, someone grounded." He attended the meeting, sat beside people in suits and badges. When they asked for his thoughts, he told them what he knew. That most people don't know what to look for. That cruelty doesn't always look like broken bones. That sometimes it sounds like silence too long behind a fence. They listened. Some took notes. A few didn't. But the ordinance moved forward. And when it passed, the shelter staff sent him a card signed by every volunteer. Scout got a special collar that day. Navy blue with a silver tag etched with a single word, "Found." One afternoon, Dennis took a detour on his route. An older house on the edge of town had a porch he'd always passed but never stopped at. A frail woman sat out front, knitting in a rocking chair. A small white dog rested at her feet. As Dennis handed over a package, she smiled. "I remember when you used to just walk by. Now you're the talk of the county." Dennis chuckled. "That wasn't the plan." "Good things rarely are," she said, gently petting her dog. He tipped his hat and continued on. Carol noticed changes in Dennis too. He smiled more, moved with more purpose, and though he still treasured the quiet, he no longer retreated into it. Their evenings were fuller now, sometimes with guests from the shelter or neighbors bringing treats for Scout. One night, as they watched a movie, Carol looked over at him. "You ever think about what comes next? Next? You're doing all this good. You've got people listening. You think about what it could grow into." Dennis thought for a long moment. "Maybe, but I think I'm still in the middle of it, still figuring it out." Scout snored lightly at their feet. The next morning, Dennis received a letter in his work mailbox. No return address. Just a piece of notebook paper with one sentence written in careful print. "You made me want to be better." He kept that one too. Later that day, a small black dog appeared near the alley behind the grocery store. A cashier called it in, and the shelter responded. Rachel sent Dennis a photo. "He's nervous," the text read, "but we got him." Dennis saved the photo and sent back a single word: "Good." He had started something, and while he didn't know exactly where it would go, he understood the importance of every moment, every voice, every choice to care. And in the quiet hours, when the day was done and the house settled into soft shadows, Dennis would sit with Scout and feel a peace he couldn't quite explain. Because once you started seeing the world through a dog's eyes, you couldn't unsee it. The forgotten became visible. The voiceless found a sound. And kindness, once started, didn't stop. It just spread. There was something about the changing of seasons that always settled Dennis into a reflective state. The air had taken on the first hints of autumn, cool enough in the mornings that he swapped his short sleeves for long, his summer cap for the warmer one with the ear flaps he always said he didn't need, but wore anyway. The leaves on the edges of town had started to blush amber and gold. Scout didn't seem to mind the chill. He bounded through piles of leaves with the same joy he brought to a sun-drenched lawn. The shift in the weather then brought a shift in rhythm, too. People were spending more time outdoors again, preparing for fall festivals, yard cleanups, and the early touches of Halloween decorations. Dennis found himself pausing longer on his route, chatting with residents, listening to kids shout about costume ideas, and seeing more people with dogs by their sides. He knew most of them by name now. They're humans, too. Scout had become a fixture not just in their own neighborhood, but in the town at large. Everyone knew him. People who hadn't cared much for dogs before would now stop just to say hello, scratch behind his ears, ask what kind of treats he liked. Dennis often found extra dog biscuits slipped into envelopes or left on porch railings addressed simply, "For Scout." At the shelter, Dennis was asked to lead a series of workshops for new volunteers. Rachel believed people responded better to him than they did to procedure. She said it was his plain way of talking, the way he focused on the dogs themselves rather than policy or statistics. "It makes it feel real," she said, "like something people can actually do." So Dennis stood in front of folding chairs and explained what to watch for. The signs of fear, neglect, malnourishment, but also the signs of trust slowly returning. The first tail wag. The first time a dog leaned against your leg instead of backing away. They don't need a perfect world, he told the group. They just need a world that notices they exist. Scout usually sat by the door, ears up, tail thumping gently. A living example. It was during one of these sessions that a young woman named Ellen approached him after everyone had left. She was in her early 20s, hair dyed a fading pink, and wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big. "Hey, Mr. Harper, can I ask you something?" "Sure thing. And it's just Dennis." She looked down, then back up. "There's this dog behind my apartment complex. He comes and goes, scared of people. But I've been leaving food. He eats it, but won't come close." "How long has he been around?" "Couple of weeks, maybe more. I think he's got a bad leg. He limps sometimes." Dennis nodded. "You mind if I come by and take a look?" She looked surprised. "You'd do that?" "I don't like to leave a dog hanging if I can help it." The next morning, Dennis met her behind the row of brick apartments near the rail yard. Ellen pointed to a thicket of weeds near a rusted fence. "He hides back there," she whispered. "I usually leave food by that broken chair." Dennis crouched down and waited. Scout sat beside him, calm and still. 20 minutes passed before they heard the soft crunch of paws. Then the dog appeared. He was brindle-colored with a thin frame and wide, wary eyes. His left hind leg didn't quite touch the ground fully when he walked. Dennis didn't move. Scout remained relaxed, watching. The dog sniffed the air, approached the food, then stopped and stared at Scout. Dennis whispered, "That's it, fella. Nothing bad here." The dog crept closer. He didn't take the food, but he didn't run either. "We'll come back tomorrow," Dennis told Ellen. "He's not ready yet, but he's close." They returned every morning that week. By Thursday, the dog took the food while Dennis was still sitting there. By Saturday, he allowed Dennis to touch his nose. On Sunday, Dennis brought a slip lead and a soft voice. The dog walked into the loop like he knew it meant something better. They brought him to the shelter. Rachel looked him over. "Older than I thought," she said. "Maybe 8 or 9. That leg's been broken before. He's lived hard." They named him Bramble. Ellen visited every day. Within 2 weeks, she applied to adopt him. Dennis helped her carry the supplies into her apartment. Food bowls, a new bed, a collar. Bramble sat near the door, as if watching to make sure Dennis was still there. "You're gonna do fine," Dennis said, scratching behind his ears. Ellen hugged him quickly. "Thank you for not treating me like I didn't know what I was doing." "We all start somewhere," Dennis said. "The important thing is you started." Back on his route, Dennis passed a house where a beagle barked cheerfully from a screened-in porch. Its owner waved, holding up a bag of dog food. "For the shelter. I'll drop it off Friday." Dennis gave a thumbs up. Scout trotted ahead, leash slack, ears perked. Later that afternoon, Dennis picked up a new packet from the shelter, a report on a stray spotted near an abandoned silo. He and Rachel had begun organizing a system for tracking calls and sightings, color-coded by urgency. The map they kept in the back room was dotted with pushpins, each one a story waiting to unfold. They drove out the next morning. The silo stood like a forgotten tower against the sky, its sides streaked with rust, its base cluttered with weeds and scraps. Scout sniffed the air. Dennis followed. Near the edge of a collapsed shed, they found her. A small shepherd mix, ribs visible, tail tucked. She didn't run. She just stared. Dennis crouched. Scout sat. The dog crept forward. 2 hours later, she was in the back of the van, curled in a blanket. They named her Ember. She was skittish but sweet, loved soft music, hated loud doors. A high school art teacher adopted her after seeing her picture on the shelter's site, said she needed company in her quiet home. Dennis delivered mail to that teacher weekly. He often saw Ember watching from the window, eyes calm. One evening, while filing records at the shelter, Rachel turned to Dennis. "You know we've taken in more strays in the last 3 months than we did in the 6 before it? That good or bad?" "Both. Bad that they're out there. Good that we're seeing them now." She smiled. "You did that." Dennis didn't answer, just patted Scout and kept filing. That weekend, Carol organized a small get-together at their house for a few shelter staff and volunteers. There was chili, cider, and a fire pit in the backyard. Scout ran around with a few other dogs, tails high. As the evening cooled, people gathered on lawn chairs and told stories. Not the tragic ones, the ones with happy endings. Dennis listened, quiet, a mug of cider in hand. "You ever think about writing it all down?" Rachel asked. "Writing what?" "The stories, the rescues, Scout's journey." Dennis shook his head. "Never thought I had the words." "You have the truth. That's better." He didn't respond, but the idea lingered. That night, in the quiet after everyone left, Dennis sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a yellow pad. Scout lay nearby, eyes half closed. He wrote a single sentence. It started with a sound in the woods. Then he stopped, smiled, and wrote the next line. Scout shifted, sighed, and drifted off to sleep. The leaves outside rustled gently. The world was still turning, and tomorrow there would be more to do. Dennis watched his breath fog in the cold air as he loaded a small box into the back of his mail truck. It was early, just past sunrise, and the frost on the grass still clung like a delicate lace. Scout sat in the passenger seat, tail tapping lightly, waiting as if he knew this morning held something different. The last few weeks had passed in a blur. Between the shelter work, his route, the calls, the reports, the stories, it all felt like a season of change had swept through not just their lives, but the whole town. Leaves had turned, fallen, and were now swept into gutters, traded for wreaths and string lights that dotted porches in preparation for the holidays. Today marked 6 months since Scout had first come home. Dennis hadn't planned anything, but Carol had. She always thought of the things he forgot to think about. "There would be pie tonight," she said, "and a bone-shaped cake cooling in the fridge for Scout." She'd even invited Rachel and a few of the shelter volunteers. Dennis had grumbled at first, but didn't mean it. Not really. He finished loading the last package and climbed into the truck. "You ready, partner?" Scout gave a soft bark. The route felt familiar, even comforting. The cold kept people indoors, but windows revealed the glow of fireplaces, bundled children waving, and dogs pressed to glass watching him pass. At one house, a boy waited with a card. "For Scout," he said shyly. Dennis accepted it with a smile. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of a mail truck and a golden dog wearing a hat. As he rounded the end of Pine Street, he saw a small shape dart across the road. He stopped. A dog, skinny, tan, limping slightly. It paused, looked back. Dennis reached for a biscuit in his coat pocket. "Let's see if we can help just one more," he said. They didn't catch her right away. The dog disappeared into the woods behind a cluster of sheds. Dennis noted the spot, marked it with a stick, and made a plan to return later. He always made a plan now. At the post office, he finished his deliveries and checked his volunteer messages. 2 new tips had come in, both from different neighborhoods, both describing similar situations. Stray dogs seen near dumpsters, frightened but hungry. He sent quick replies, logged the sightings, and forwarded them to Rachel. When he returned home, the sun was already dropping low, casting the sky in hues of faded apricot and slate. Scout bounded ahead, eager to see Carol. She opened the door before Dennis reached it. "You're just in time. Go change. People are coming soon." He kissed her cheek and headed upstairs, Scout trailing behind. The familiar creak of the stairs, the warmth of the house. It grounded him. After he changed into a clean shirt and jeans, he came back down to find Carol lighting candles and setting plates. "We don't usually do parties," he said. "We don't usually save dogs either." The guests arrived slowly. Rachel first, carrying a pie and a new leash for Scout. Then Ellen with Bramble trotting beside her, tail high. A couple from the shelter brought cookies and their recently adopted retriever. Even Detective Kerrigan showed up with a grin and a large dog treat tied with a red ribbon. They ate chili, shared laughs, and told stories, some new, some that had already been retold dozens of times. Scout moved from guest to guest like a gentle host, basking in attention, head resting on knees, tail wagging at every familiar voice. At one point, Dennis stepped outside to catch a breath. The cold hit his lungs, sharp and clean. He looked up at the stars. Kerrigan joined him after a minute. "You ever think about what it would have looked like if you hadn't walked into those woods that day?" Dennis nodded slowly. "Sometimes. And every time. It makes me glad I did." She smiled. "We don't get to choose many moments that matter. But when they come, they stay." He watched his breath rise. "I used to think all I did was carry mail. And now you carry more." They stood in silence for a while, the muffled sound of laughter and barking echoing from inside. When Dennis re-entered the house, Carol was placing a small cake in front of Scout. Everyone gathered around, clapping lightly as she said, "To Scout, who found us when we didn't know we needed finding." Scout barked once and immediately dug into the cake, tail wagging. Laughter rippled through the room. Dennis stood back, watching. The flicker of lights against the windows, the shapes of people who had come together, the dogs weaving through the legs of chairs, the way Carol beamed at Scout like he was something sacred. He stepped into the living room and opened the drawer of the side table. Inside were the letters, the newspaper clippings, the drawings from kids. He pulled them out and spread them across the table. Pages that told a story. Not just Scout's. Not just his own. The room slowly quieted as people gathered around. "I didn't write any of this down," Dennis said. "Not the whole story, but you did. All of you. Every dog, every letter, every call. It all means something." Rachel put a hand on his shoulder. "We're still writing it." Dennis nodded. "That stray I saw this morning, she's still out there. I'll go back tomorrow. Try again." Ellen said, "We'll go with you." Scout barked, as if he approved. Carol handed Dennis a worn folder. Inside were sheets of paper, blank. "You don't have to write it perfectly," she said. "Just write it." Dennis sat down, pen in hand. He looked at the blank page. Then he began. It started with a sound in the woods, a breath, a whimper, a quiet call for help that the world had nearly missed. But one man heard it, and one dog survived it. And together, they reminded a town what it meant to care. Not perfectly, not loudly, but steadily, day by day, choice by choice. Scout rested beside his chair, eyes fluttering shut. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the wind carried the last leaves of fall across the quiet street. And inside, where it was warm and full of stories, Dennis kept writing, because the world needed to remember what it meant to pay attention, to see the small things, to notice the quiet ones, to choose kindness, even when it would be easier to keep walking. Scout stirred, shifting closer. Dennis paused and smiled. They were home.